So, what does freedom truly mean? I mean, it's a word we hear constantly, echoes through, every big debate right across the political map.
Yeah, but its meaning feels incredibly slippery sometimes.
Totally. It shifts depending on who's talking and, well, what they're trying to achieve.
Hmm.
On the deep dive, we take your sources, we really immerse ourselves in them, and we try to pull out the most important nuggets of knowledge, the key insights.
Giving you that shortcut to being genuinely well-informed without getting totally bogged down.
Exactly. And today we're diving deep into that very concept, liberty or freedom.
You'd think everyone agrees it's a good thing, right? A good end.
You would. But the real puzzle, the fascinating part, is how much people disagree on the means to get there. The how.
It's wild. Some historical figures, even champions of, absolute rule, have argued that real freedom for regular folks comes through submission.
Yeah, submitted to authority. Seems counterintuitive.
It really does.
Mm.
And, this isn't just some dusty old philosophical debate. It's
Yeah.
not abstract. The idea of liberty, this ideal, it's been the spark for so many revolutionary struggles. Think about it fighting against tyranny, against foreign regimes.
Absolutely. History's full of it.
And here's a really crucial link, that fight for liberty. It's almost always tangled up with the philosophy of equality.
How so?
Well, when oppressed groups rise up, they're not just demanding freedom, they're challenging the idea that their oppressors are somehow superior. They're demanding justice based on that universal idea that fundamentally all humans are equal.
Okay, that makes sense. So let's start at the beginning of this concept then.
Where does it come from?
Exactly. Our sources suggest liberty isn't just, a political gadget invented in some parliament.
Right.
It's described as something much deeper, a fundamental quality of man, something that actually sets us, Homo sapiens, apart from other living creatures.
Interesting. So what's the difference?
Well, think about animals. They're driven mostly by basic survival, right?
Mm.
The struggle for existence, survival of the fittest. Yeah, instinct. They don't really have a grand aim of life beyond just existing. But humans, we evolved complex institutions, we've shaped nature, arguably tamed it.
All in pursuit of something more.
Exactly. Something beyond just staying alive. And that pursuit, that search for purpose, seems intrinsically linked to how we think about freedom.
Hmm. But, okay, despite, thousands of years of civilization, we haven't exactly shed all our animal ways, have we?
Not entirely, no. The sources point out that historically you often see the selfish, the strong, the, clever ones grabbing power.
And creating these divisions, privileged sections, underprivileged sections.
Right. And then those in power work hard to justify the status quo, make it seem natural or necessary.
Like Aristotle.
Yeah, Aristotle's defense of slavery is a classic and frankly pretty disturbing example.
He actually argued slaves were just living tools.
He did, and that their forced labor provided the leisure that free men supposedly needed to cultivate virtue and engage in politics.
Wow, that really throws things into perspective.
It does. And it underlines why so often liberty becomes the voice of the oppressed. It's this powerful force behind social change precisely because it pushes back against those kinds of justifications for inequality.
Okay, so that sets up a huge challenge for any society, doesn't it?
Yeah, how do you balance what one person wants, their individual claim to freedom, with what society as a whole needs?
This is where it gets really interesting.
It really does, because if an individual's claim gets stretched too far, if it ignores everyone else.
Then liberty can curdle into something else. It becomes license.
License, explain that a bit more.
So license is basically the total absence or removal of all restraints on what you do. You act in utter disregard for anyone else's interests.
Sounds like absolute freedom on the surface.
It might sound like it, but it's actually self-contradictory. It undermines the very possibility of a stable society.
How so?
Think about it. If one person's liberty is totally unlimited, it inevitably stomps on someone else's. It becomes constraint or oppression for others.
Give me an example.
Okay, the classic one is, the large fish will be free to swallow the smaller one. The liberty of the strong just crushes the weaker.
Right,
Or imagine a thief feels totally free to take your property. That's their liberty maybe, but it destroys everyone else's security.
Yeah, okay.
Or a driver. If they have the freedom to drive at any speed, any direction, just on a whim.
It endangers everyone else on the road. Their life, their liberty too.
Exactly. So that kind of freedom, that license, it actually destroys the whole point of living together cooperatively.
So, okay, true freedom can't be this kind of unlimited free-for-all.
Definitely not.
The philosopher L.T. Hobhouse, he put it really well. He said something like, the unchartered freedom of one would be the conditional servitude of all but one.
Meaning if one person is totally free, everyone else is basically their slave.
Right. And conversely, he said, a freedom that everyone can enjoy has to impose some restraint upon everyone.
It's a fundamental trade-off, isn't it? For collective freedom, you need individual limits.
Seems so.
And Ernest Barker, another thinker, he nailed this too. He said, liberty for each person is relative to others. It has to be adjusted, it must be regulated.
Otherwise, it wouldn't even exist.
Pretty much. He argued it literally wouldn't exist unless it was regulated. Think about, say, the liberty of a factory owner to set working conditions.
Okay.
That has to be adjusted, balanced against the liberty of the worker to have safe conditions, fair pay, basic dignity.
If one side has absolute freedom.
The other side suffers. It becomes exploitation, not freedom.
Okay, this makes sense. But it brings us to a really thorny issue now. Balancing individual liberty, not just with other individuals, but with the state, with authority.
Yes, the state.
If we agree individuals aren't perfect and their freedom can't be absolute, what does that mean for the state? Can it be absolute? Should it be?
That's been a massive conflict in political philosophy for centuries, a real core tension.
So what are the main camps?
Well, some thinkers, like Thomas Hobbes back in the 17th century, were pretty stark about it. He basically said liberty has to be severely limited.
Why?
To make way for a strong state. Because Hobbes believed without that powerful authority, life would be just chaos.
Yeah.
Solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short, as he famously put it. Order over liberty, essentially.
Okay, that's one side.
Then you have others, like John Locke, later J.S. Mill, who argued pretty much the opposite.
Which was?
That state authority needs to be seriously limited. You have to carve out as much space as possible for individual liberty, protect the individual from the state, in many ways.
So it's this fundamental clash, strong state for order versus limited state for freedom.
Exactly. And societies are constantly trying to find the right balance, shifting back and forth.
And, okay, practically speaking, a state might have, like, unlimited legal powers on paper. The British Parliament is often used as an example, right? Theoretically, it can pass any law.
Legally, yes.
Correct.
But the sources make a crucial point. No state has unlimited practical power. You can't just rule by force forever.
Doesn't work long term.
Right. Authority is much, much more effective when it's seen as legitimate, when it has moral support, not just guns.
And what does legitimacy mean here exactly?
It's about the quality of an act or a system being seen as lawful, as right, as reasonable by the people who are actually affected by it.
So it's about consent, in a way.
In a big way. The real insight here is that genuine legitimacy, the kind that lets a state govern effectively and stably, ultimately comes from the people. They have to believe in it.
Okay. Now, circling back to freedom as absence of restraint, we established it doesn't mean no rules.
Right. It means absence of unreasonable restraints. That's the key qualifier.
So to really get our heads around this, we need to break liberty down. Our sources talk about three main dimensions.
Yeah, this is helpful. Civil, political, and economic liberty.
Let's start with civil liberty. What's that about?
Okay, civil liberty. Ernest Barker described this as the liberty of a person just as an individual. Your personal freedoms.
Like what?
Well, it breaks down further. First, there's physical freedom. Pretty basic.
Freedom from being physically harmed.
Exactly. Freedom from injury, threats to your life, freedom to move around. This one's not usually controversial. We only restrict it for, public safety, law and order.
Yep, makes sense. What else?
Second, intellectual freedom. This is huge. Freedom of thought, belief, opinion.
The freedom to think what you want.
And to express it. J.S. Mill, again in On Liberty, such a landmark book from 1859, made this incredibly powerful defense.
What was his argument?
He argued that silencing any opinion, even one you're sure is wrong, actually harms all of humanity.
How?
Well, if the opinion happens to be right, even partly right, you lose the chance to exchange your error for truth.
Okay.
And if the opinion is wrong, you lose the benefit of truth being challenged. You lose, as he put it, the clearer perception and livelier impression of truth produced by the collision with error.
So debating even bad ideas makes the good ideas stronger.
That's the core insight. Intellectual freedom isn't just about individual rights. It's essential for finding truth and for society to progress.
Powerful stuff. Okay, what's the third part of civil liberty?
The third part is practical freedom, often talked about as freedom of contract, the ability to make agreements, enter into contracts for work, business, whatever.
Seems straightforward.
But here's the catch. What happens when there's a big power imbalance? When a stronger party can basically force a weaker party into a bad deal.
Right. Exploitation.
Exactly. Hobhouse warned about this too. He said, real freedom of contract implies such a substantial equality between the parties, leaves to each a real choice.
So if there's no real choice, it's not real freedom.
Pretty much. Hobhouse even warned that absolute unchecked freedom of contract could let someone sell themselves or be forced to sell themselves into slavery.
Wow. So the takeaway is?
The takeaway is that this freedom is vital, yes, but it absolutely needs reasonable limitations to prevent people from being exploited. It can't be absolute.
Okay, so that's civil, our personal sphere. Now let's shift gears. What about our role as citizens? Political liberty.
Right. Political liberty is about exercising freedom in your capacity as a citizen, participating in the political life of your community.
How has that been understood?
Historically, some thinkers, like William Blackstone, saw it mainly as a negative thing, curbing government, keeping power in check, protecting people from the rulers.
Like checks and balances.
Yeah, that kind of idea. But in modern democracies, where the government is supposed to be by the people.
The theory, anyway.
The theory, yes. It's seen more positively. It's about constituting the government, choosing it, and then controlling it.
Through elections.
Elections are key, yes. That general act of choice. But it's also about the continuous process of discussion, free speech, free press, assembly allowing citizens to influence policy between elections.
But okay, let's be real. Is just having the right to vote, the right to free speech on paper, is that enough?
That's the critical question, isn't it? Our sources really push on this. What if elections are fought and won with the help of money and manipulative power?
Or what if the media, which shapes how we see things, is controlled by a tiny group of powerful interests? Big corporations, maybe.
Exactly. In those situations, does having the formal political rights actually give ordinary people real, substantive freedom? Or is it just an illusion?
So the insight is that legal rights are necessary, but not sufficient.
Precisely. True political liberty needs conditions that let people actually use those rights meaningfully.
Yeah.
A level playing field, access to information, things like that.
Okay, that leads us to the third dimension, economic liberty.
Yes, liberty in our capacity as workers, as
Like-
economic actors.
And this, you said, is where liberty and equality really intersect, or maybe clash.
It's definitely where the adjustment between them becomes absolutely essential. The tension is often sharpest here.
How so?
Well, R.H. Tawney, writing back in 1938 in his book Equality, put it brilliantly.
What did he say?
He said, look, if you construe liberty realistically, not just as basic civil and political rights, but as having securities that the economically weak will not be at the mercy of the economically strong.
Okay, then what?
Then, he argued, a large measure of equality, so far from being inimical to liberty, is essential to it.
So you need some level of economic equality for people to actually be free.
That's Tawney's point. Freedom from desperation, freedom from being totally dependent on the whim of an employer or landlord. And this is exactly where those two big concepts we hear about negative and positive liberty often come into direct conflict.
Ah, yes. Negative versus positive liberty. Let's unpack that. It feels like a really core distinction in all these debates.
It really is. Liberal writers often use liberty and freedom interchangeably, usually defining it simply as the absence of restraint.
But we've already seen that's too simple. The crucial question is...
What kind of constraints are we talking about? What are we being freed from or freed to do?
Right.
A great way to illustrate this is the four freedoms from the Atlantic Charter back in 1941. Remember those?
Vaguely. Remind me.
Freedom of speech, freedom of worship, freedom from fear, and freedom from want. Now, D.D. Raphael used these to highlight the core difference. Take the first two. Freedom of speech, freedom of worship.
These answer the question, freedom to do what?
Exactly. They imply a negative role for the state. The state's job is just not to interfere. Don't censor speech, don't dictate religion. Leave people alone. That's negative liberty.
Okay, being left alone. Got it.
Now look at the other two. Freedom from fear, freedom from want.
These answer, freedom from what? From bad things.
Right. And achieving these implies a positive role for the state. The state needs to do something, provide security, ensure basic economic well-being to remove the impediments that prevent people from being truly free.
So it's about having the actual capacity or opportunity to live without fear or deprivation.
Precisely. That's positive liberty. The state actively enabling freedom, not just passively allowing it.
Now, it's really important to stress, isn't it, that these two aren't necessarily enemies.
Absolutely not. That's a common misconception. Our sources emphasize they're often complementary.
Like two sides of the same coin.
Exactly. Think about it. You might have negative liberty. No one's legally stopping you from speaking. But if you have no education, no platform, maybe you're starving. How meaningful is that freedom to speak? Positive conditions can make negative liberties real.
Okay. So historically, which one came first or got more emphasis?
Well, the initial big push for liberty, especially around the 17th century in Europe, during the rise of capitalism against feudalism, that was heavily focused on negative liberty.
Why then?
It was about freeing economic activity, freeing individuals from the old constraints, guild rules, aristocratic privileges, state monopolies. The emerging capitalist class wanted freedom from interference.
The idea being?
The dominant idea, pushed by thinkers like Adam Smith and Jeremy Bentham, was basically laissez-faire, let it be. Everyone knows their own interest best. The state shouldn't meddle, shouldn't try to decide people's goals.
Let the market sort it out.
Pretty much. This led to the ideal of the minimal state, the night watchman state, just protecting property and enforcing contracts. Society was often viewed almost as just a collection of separate individuals, atomized, alienated individuals, as some described it.
But that didn't work out perfectly, did it?
Far from it. By the mid-19th century, it was becoming glaringly obvious that this system, this unchecked negative liberty, was creating massive problems.
Like what?
Terrible working conditions, child labor, huge inequalities, cycles of poverty and boom and bust. The freedom of the factory owner often meant misery for the worker.
So people started demanding something different.
Yes. Humanist writers, socialists, early Marxists, they all started critiquing this narrow view and demanding a new definition of liberty, one that took social and economic realities into account, one that recognized you couldn't just ignore power imbalances.
And this is where positive liberty starts to gain more traction.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And J.S. Mill is, again, a really pivotal figure here.
How so? He started as a laissez-faire guy, didn't he?
He did, but he was incredibly perceptive. He saw the problems, the weaknesses, and he began to modify his views significantly.
What was his key move?
He made this famous distinction between self-regarding actions and other-regarding actions.
Okay, explain that.
Self-regarding actions are things you do that supposedly only affect yourself. Mill argued here, individuals should have complete freedom. The state has no business interfering.
Makes sense.
But other-regarding actions are things you do that do affect others. Here, Mill argued, the community, often via the state, does have a right to regulate or coerce, if necessary, for the common good.
Where do you draw the line, though? Isn't almost everything potentially other-regarding?
That's the perennial debate. The line is fuzzy and contested. But the principle was revolutionary for liberalism. It opened the door for justifying state intervention beyond just protecting property.
So Mill paved the way for?
He paved the way for things like a sound theory of taxation, beyond just funding the minimal state. He argued for limiting the right of inheritance to reduce entrenched inequality, and crucially, he insisted on state provision of education.
Because education empowers people, gives them capacity.
Exactly. It's a classic positive liberty measure. And following Mill, other thinkers like T.H. Green, Hobhouse again, Harold Lasky, they built on this. They explicitly argued private property wasn't some absolute, untouchable right.
And the state had a duty.
A positive duty to secure the welfare of its citizens, to ensure the conditions for a genuinely good life, not just survival.
So fast forward to today, positive liberty is pretty much accepted in modern welfare states, right? As a necessary partner to negative liberty.
Generally, yes. Most mainstream political thought accepts some mix. But, and this is where it gets really interesting again, contemporary thinkers are still fiercely debating these concepts, challenging them, redefining them, often with radically different conclusions about what freedom means and how society should be organized.
Okay, let's get into these modern debates. Where do we start? Libertarians.
Yeah, let's look at the libertarian perspective first, which often emphasizes negative liberty very strongly. Isaiah Berlin is a key figure.
His Two Concepts of Liberty essay from 1958?
That's the one. Hugely influential. He gave those clear definitions we discussed. Negative liberty as not being prevented by others, and positive liberty as being your own master, having self-control and capacity.
But he was critical of positive liberty, wasn't he? Or worried about it.
He was, particularly about how it could be twisted to justify authoritarianism, forcing people to be free. But here's his really controversial point on economics.
Okay.
Berlin argued that if someone is, say, too poor to afford bread or too poor to use the law courts, they are not actually deprived of political liberty in his sense.
Why not? That seems odd.
Because, for Berlin, negative liberty is only about direct interference by other humans. Poverty, he suggested, might be like an inability to fly a limitation, perhaps tragic, but not a deprivation of liberty by the state unless the state actively caused it. The state isn't concerned, in this view, with your capacity or incapacity to fulfill one's desires.
Wow. Oh, okay. That's a very specific definition. And critics jumped on that.
Oh, yeah. Critics like Norman Barry and C.B. McPherson hit back hard.
What was their argument?
They said Berlin was confusing natural limitations like not being able to fly like an eagle, which politics can't fix, with social disabilities, like poverty that results from how society is organized, from economic structures.
And those can be changed.
Absolutely. That's the crucial insight. Social disabilities are alterable by political action. Poverty isn't like bad weather. It's often the result of policy choices or systemic issues. And historically, these are precisely the kinds of issues that lead to demands for change, even revolutions.
So what Berlin saw as maybe just bad luck, others see as a systemic lack of freedom that needs fixing.
Exactly. A lack of positive liberty that undermines negative liberty, too.
Okay, who else in the libertarian camp?
Hayek.
F.A. Hayek, yes. Another giant. His book, The Constitution of Liberty from 1960, is key. He defined liberty very precisely as not subject to coercion by the arbitrary will of another.
Only coercion by others counts.
Right. And he was very careful to distinguish this true liberty from other things people call freedom.
Like what?
Like political freedom, which is just about participating in government. You could participate in electing a tyrant, Hayek would say. Or inner freedom, like being guided by reason instead of impulse. Or freedom as power, just having the ability to get what you want. None of those, for Hayek, were the core meaning of liberty.
What was he worried about?
His big concern was preventing what he called collectivists, socialists, welfare state advocates from hijacking the word freedom. He feared they'd use a broad, fuzzy notion of positive freedom to justify massive state intervention, which he believed inevitably destroys actual individual liberty, the freedom from coercion.
How did he see liberty and equality relating? He saw them as fundamentally opposed, especially material equality. He argued, quite provocatively, that if we treat them equally, the result must be inequality in their actual position. People have different talents, different luck.
So trying to make outcomes equal requires...
It requires constant coercion by the state, taking from some to give to others, telling people what they can and can't do with their property or labor. And that, for Hayek, is the antithesis of freedom.
He had that really stark quote, didn't he?
He did. It is better that some should be free than none, and better that many should have full freedom than that all should have a limited freedom. Freedom for some is better than limited freedom for all, if that's the trade-off.
Wow, that's a challenging idea. What are the main criticisms of Hayek?
Well, some argue his focus on preventing coercion ends up making the individual just a means to an end, like allowing inequality is okay if it leads to overall progress, even if some individuals suffer. Critics also say his conclusions sometimes don't logically follow from his own premises about avoiding arbitrary will.
Okay, and Milton Friedman, another big name.
Milton Friedman, yeah. His book, Capitalism and Freedom from 1962, made the case bluntly. Capitalism isn't just compatible with freedom, it's a necessary condition for it.
And
Therefore, pursuing equality, especially economic equality through state action, undermines freedom because it undermined capitalism.
What was his ideal?
A free private enterprise exchange economy. Basically, pure market capitalism, with government doing only the absolute minimum the market can't handle, like enforcing contracts, providing a stable currency, maybe some very limited safety net.
What's the pushback on Friedman? McPherson again?
McPherson, yes, was a major critic. He argued Friedman blurred a crucial distinction.
Which was?
The distinction between a simple exchange economy, maybe like a farmer's market where everyone brings their own goods, and a capitalist economy where a large portion of the population doesn't own capital, tools, factories, land,
Right.
and has to sell their labor power to survive.
And in that situation?
In that situation, McPherson argued, workers can be coerced not by direct government force, but by market forces, by the necessity of taking whatever job is offered, because the alternative is starvation. So the free exchange of labor isn't always truly free if one side holds all the cards.
So the lack of economic power becomes a form of coercion itself.
That's the argument. A lack of positive liberty, again, impacting real freedom.
And Robert Nozick, he fits in here too.
Robert Nozick, definitely. His Anarchy, State, and Utopia from 1974 is another cornerstone of libertarian thought, also strongly opposing equality.
His ideal state was...
The minimal state, even more minimal than some others might accept. Its only legitimate function is protecting property rights derived from just acquisition and voluntary exchanges. Nothing more.
So no redistribution.
Absolutely not. Nozick argued that inequalities that result from people's different effort and talents are just, and any attempt by the state to rectify them through redistributive transfers, like taxing the rich to help the poor, is unjust coercion, violating the property rights of those taxed.
It's a very principled stand on property rights.
Extremely. But critics immediately point out that it seems to ignore how much things like inherited wealth, social connections, or just plain luck factors unrelated to individual effort and talents determine people's starting points and outcomes.
And it doesn't really reflect how complex capitalism works in reality.
Many argue it doesn't. It presents a very idealized picture of voluntary exchange that doesn't always match the power dynamics and systemic factors at play.
Okay, so that's a strong current of thought emphasizing negative liberty, property rights, and often seeing equality as the enemy. What's the counter perspective from the Marxist tradition? It must be radically different.
Radically different, yes. Marxists analyze freedom not through the lens of the isolated individual, but against the backdrop of broader socioeconomic conditions. They reject that whole idea of the atomized, alienated individual that underpins much liberal and libertarian thought.
So freedom isn't just about being left alone by the state.
Not at all. For Marxists, the key concept is humanity's potential leap from necessity to freedom.
What does that mean? Leap from necessity?
The idea, drawing from thinkers like Engels, is that necessity is blind only insofar as it is not understood. Things seem determined, unavoidable, only when we don't grasp the underlying laws governing them.
Like laws of nature or society?
Both. True freedom, in this view, comes from gaining knowledge of these laws, understanding how nature works, how society and economics work, and then consciously, systematically using that knowledge to shape our destiny, rather than being blindly driven by forces we don't comprehend.
And capitalism, in this view, is?
Capitalism is seen as a system still largely governed by necessity. Its internal contradictions lead inevitably to crises, exploitation, alienation. It's a system where individuals, even the capitalists, are driven by market forces beyond their full control.
So the solution the leap to freedom requires?
It requires overcoming capitalism, specifically the socialization of the means of production, collective ownership, and democratic control over the economy. This, Marxists argue, is what will finally allow humanity to move from being ruled by blind economic forces into a new era of freedom.
The kingdom of freedom.
Exactly. As the Communist Manifesto famously put the ultimate vision. A society where the free development of each is the condition for the free development of all. Individual flourishing and collective flourishing become intertwined, not opposed.
And Marx's earlier writings, the economic and philosophic manuscripts from 1844, they focus heavily on this idea of alienation, right? That seems central to his critique of capitalism's lack of freedom.
Absolutely central. Alienation is perhaps Marx's most profound concept regarding the human cost of capitalism, the way it strips away freedom and fulfillment. Let's unpack it. It's really worth understanding.
Okay, let's do it. He talked about 4 levels.
Yes. First, alienation from the product of your labor.
Meaning?
The worker creates something, but it doesn't belong to them. It belongs to the capitalist. They have no control over it, and often they can't even afford to buy it. The product becomes an alien thing that dominates them.
Okay, that's 1.
Second, alienation from the process of work itself, from the activity of labor. Work isn't a fulfilling creative activity. It's forced, repetitive, often mindless, done only to survive. The worker feels estranged from their own actions while working. They only feel like themselves when they stop working.
Right. The work itself is drudgery.
Third, alienation from what Marx called our Gattungswesen, our species being or essential human nature, and relatedly from nature itself.
What does that mean?
For Marx, what makes us human is our ability to consciously, creatively shape the world around us. Capitalism turns this creative potential into mere toil. Work becomes routinized, disconnected from genuine human needs and creativity, and our relationship with the natural world becomes purely instrumental, something to be exploited.
We lose touch with our creative essence.
Exactly. And finally, fourth, alienation from other men, from fellow human beings.
Because of competition.
Largely, yes. The capitalist system pits people against each other. Worker against worker for jobs. Capitalist against capitalist for market share. Class interests create fundamental divisions and conflict, preventing genuine community and solidarity.
So you're cut off from your product, your work, your human nature, and other people. That's bleak.
It's a profound critique of the lack of freedom under capitalism, going way beyond just state interference. Life gets reduced to the realm of necessity, a kind of animal existence focused only on survival, with little room for art, culture, community, self-realization, the things that make life truly human and free.
And for Marxists, the only way out of this alienation, this bondage,
Is a socialist revolution that abolishes private ownership of the means of production and allows for a society based on cooperation and meeting human needs, not profit. That's the path to true freedom.
Okay, now what about neo-Marxists? How did they update or adapt these ideas, especially in the 20th century? Marcuse comes to mind.
Herbert Marcuse, yes.
Yeah.
Very influential, especially in the 60s. His book, One-Dimensional Man from 1964, offered a powerful critique of advanced industrial society, both capitalist and, arguably, Soviet-style communist.
What was his main argument?
He argued that modern capitalism maintains control not just through obvious repression or economic power, but more subtly, through culture and ideology. It exercises a kind of monopolistic control over our consciousness.
How?
Through mass media, advertising, consumer culture. The system doesn't just satisfy needs. It actively creates desires for commodities, for endless consumption. False needs are manufactured.
And the effect of this is?
The result, Marcuse argued, is a distorted second nature of man. People, including the working class who are supposed to be the revolutionary force, become integrated into the system. They become insensitive to their original discontent because they're constantly being offered superficial gratifications, consumer goods, entertainment.
So the genuine urge for freedom just kind of disappears. People become content in their unfreedom.
That was his fear. They accept the system because it delivers a certain level of material comfort, even if it's spiritually empty and ultimately repressive. They become one-dimensional, unable to imagine alternatives.
What was his solution then, if the working class was integrated?
It was less clear, but in works like Eros and Civilization from 1966, he talked about the need for a great refusal, an awakening, often led by those on the margins, students, intellectuals, minorities, those not fully integrated to challenge the system's logic and reawaken the possibility of genuine liberation, aiming for a society where work will become play, driven by creative instincts rather than alienated labor.
That sounds quite utopian. What were the criticisms of Marcuse?
Critics questioned whether human needs are really so easily manipulated or if there's a limit. They also pointed out the potential elitism in relying on a marginal elite to lead the revolution rather than the broader working class as in traditional Marxism. And some asked if his vision of a non-repressive society was really achievable.
Okay, and who else? You mentioned McPherson before as a critic of the libertarians. Was he a neo-Marxist?
C.B. McPherson is often associated with the neo-Marxist or critical theory tradition, yes. A Canadian political theorist, very insightful critic of liberal democracy and capitalism. His Democratic Theory Essays and Retrieval from 1973 is a key work.
What was his central idea about freedom?
He focused on the concept of human powers. He distinguished between developmental power and extractive power.
Okay, break those down.
Developmental power is your ability to use and develop your own human capacities, your potential, your skills, your creativity. It's about self-realization.
And extractive power?
Extractive power is the ability to extract benefits from others, to use their capacities and labor for your own ends.
So in capitalist society?
McPherson argued that in capitalist society, for the majority, the working class, their developmental power is negligible. They lack the resources and opportunities to fully develop their potential, and their extractive power is nil. They can't really benefit from others' labor in the way capitalists can.
So this unequal distribution of power leads to?
It leads to a fundamental erosion of creative freedom for large parts of the population. They lack the power to truly shape their own lives and develop their full human potential.
What was his conclusion then? Is there any hope within capitalism?
He was quite critical, but he did acknowledge that it is only in the welfare state variety of capitalism that there is a certain amount of checking of economic power by the political power. So things like unions, regulations, social programs, these positive liberty measures offer at least some counterbalance, some potential to reclaim a degree of developmental power, even if they don't fundamentally change the system's extractive nature.
So across this whole spectrum, from libertarians to Marxists, it's just fascinating, isn't it, how the same word, liberty, can lead to such radically different visions of a good society.
Absolutely. And you see how intertwined it constantly is with ideas about equality, power, and human nature itself.
Which brings us nicely back to equality. We touched on it earlier, but maybe just to round things off.
Yeah, equality, like liberty, is obviously a huge political ideal today. You trace it right back to the French Revolution. Liberty, equality, fraternity, they go together, at least aspirationally.
And there's that crucial distinction you mentioned our sources make about equality. It's not saying everyone is the same, right?
Exactly. That's key. The modern idea of equality comes from rights theory. It's prescriptive, not descriptive.
Meaning, we argue people must be treated as equals.
As having equal moral worth, deserving equal rights, equal consideration. Not that they are, in fact, identical in talents, abilities, or outcomes.
Which is a massive shift from someone like Aristotle.
Huge shift. Aristotle looked at the inequalities he saw between men and women, masters and slaves, Greeks and barbarians, and basically said, yeah, that's natural. We should recognize and maintain those existing inequalities.
Whereas the modern ideal insists on a fundamental equality despite those differences.
Precisely. It's a principle of justice we strive for, an ideal to measure our society against, not just a description of reality.
Wow. Okay, so wrapping this all up, this deep dive into liberty, it really shows the complexity, doesn't it?
It really does. We started with what seemed simple absence of restraint, but as we dug deeper, we found more and more direct or indirect, apparent or subtle sources of constraint, coercion, and domination. It just gets more complex the more you look.
From state laws to economic pressures to, well, even media manipulation shaping our desires.
Yeah, the potential threats to genuine freedom are multifaceted.
And it really drives home that the quest for freedom isn't something you achieve once and for all. It's a continuous process, isn't it?
A constant struggle, a constant negotiation, and it's definitely not something you can enjoy in isolation.
That seems key. Genuine freedom, maybe the maximum possible freedom we can hope for, is found only in a congenial social order.
Right, where, to use Marx's phrase again in a broader sense, the free development of each is actually seen as the necessary condition for the free development of all. My freedom depends on yours, and yours on mine.
It's a collective project.
It has to be.
So, okay, to leave our listeners with something to chew on.
Considering this huge spectrum of what liberty can mean,
Yeah.
from being left alone to having the actual capacity to act, and given that constant tension between what I want as an individual and what we need as a society.
What's the provocative thought?
Maybe ask yourself, what specific aspect of your own freedom do you personally value the most right now? And, perhaps more uncomfortably, what are you willing to compromise? What restraints are you willing to accept for the sake of ensuring the freedom or perhaps the equality of others in your community?